The crisp Arizona air hung heavy with the scent of pine and high desert dust, a smell I'd come to associate with pure, unadulterated peace. That peace, the kind you buy with years of hard work and endless sunrises over your own acreage, was about to be obliterated by a pair of expensive sunglasses and an entitlement complex the size of Texas. My name is Jake, and this is the story of how an HOA Karen declared war on my ranch gate, and how I set a trap so poetic, so legally sound, that it became a legend in the valley. You won't believe the look on her face when she realized what I'd done. Before we dive in, comment which country you're watching from, and what's the craziest thing your HOA has ever tried to pull. The ranch wasn't just a home, it was a sanctuary. 180 acres of freedom, fenced, gated, and tucked away from the subdivision creeping up the mesa like a slow-moving virus. My entrance, a formidable 10-foot steel gate, was the final line of defense against the outside world. It was secured with a heavy-duty combination lock, the kind favored by maximum security facilities, not because I was paranoid, but because I valued my privacy and the safety of my livestock, particularly my prized quarter horses. This wasn't some cookie-cutter suburban street, this was ranch country, and gates were not a suggestion, they were a declaration of ownership. I was enjoying a quiet Saturday morning, the kind where the only soundtrack is the gentle whir of the well pump and the distant call of a hawk. I was nursing a mug of black coffee, watching the early light spread across the pasture when the tranquility was shattered by a sound I'd grown to despise, the aggressive, impatient blast of an imported car horn. It was a BMW, the kind of vehicle that screams, "I demand to speak to your manager," and it was sitting right outside my steel gate. I sighed, recognizing the car immediately. It belonged to Patricia, a recent transplant to the new Executive Estates development half a mile down the road, and worse, she was the newly elected president of the fledgling Homeowners Association. Patricia, or HOA Karen, as she was rapidly becoming known, had decided that my private ranch road was the perfect shortcut to the main highway, shaving a critical 5 minutes off her already privileged commute. My gate was the inconvenient obstruction in her meticulously planned schedule. I watched her from my porch, a silhouette of self-importance, as she stepped out of her pristine sedan. She was wearing a perfectly pressed linen suit that was utterly ridiculous for the desert, and she marched up to the gate with the furious energy of a woman who believes the world is obligated to part for her. She didn't call, she didn't knock, she didn't even attempt to find the combination. She just stood there, arms crossed, glaring at my ranch sign which clearly stated, private property. No trespassing, you will be PRSECUTD. I watched this theatrical display for a full minute, letting her boil in her own impatience before I finally walked down, my boots crunching rhythmically on the gravel. "Can I help you, Patricia?" I asked, my voice flat, betraying none of the irritation bubbling in my gut. She spun around, her face an explosion of controlled fury. "Help me? Yes, you can remove this obstruction immediately," she spat, gesturing wildly at the steel gate. "This is a fire hazard, Jake, and an egregious eyesore. The HOA has voted. We need this shortcut and we are demanding access. Give me the code or I will have this whole monstrosity cut down by noon." I simply stared at her, taking a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the moment before I dropped the hammer. "Patricia," I said, pointing to the sign, "this is not HOA property. This is my private, deeded land, purchased long before your subdivision was even staked out. You have no jurisdiction here. Zero, zilch. If you touch this gate, you'll be facing felony vandalism charges." She scoffed, producing a crisp, official-looking document from a designer handbag. "We have an easement, Jake, we just filed it. See Section 4, Clause B, Common Access. You're legally required to comply." She thrust the paper at me, her manicured finger pointing accusingly at a dense block of legal jargon, but I didn't even need to read it to know she was bluffing. I knew my property boundaries better than I knew the back of my hand, and I knew for a fact that this document was worth less than the paper it was printed on. This initial confrontation was just the opening salvo in what quickly became a campaign of pure, self-righteous harassment. She didn't manage to cut the gate down, but she did start coming back, almost daily, inventing new ways to cause trouble. She tried to wedge it open with a cinder block, which only earned her a dent in her pristine car when the automatic closer engaged. Then she started parking her car right in front of the gate, blocking the entrance completely, a passive-aggressive monument to her own frustration. Each time I'd have to call the sheriff, who was getting increasingly weary of the HOA drama, but always, eventually, she would be forced to move, muttering threats under her breath about her attorney and municipal codes that didn't exist. I should have pressed charges then, but I kept hoping she would simply tire herself out and focus on important HOA matters, like the color of someone's mailbox or the approved height of a lawn gnome. That was my mistake, underestimating the sheer obsessive tenacity of a Karen on a mission. The real escalation came one Tuesday afternoon when I was running errands in town. I received a frantic text from my ranch hand. "Boss, she's here." She drove through the gate. "Lock is busted," she just kept going. My blood ran cold. This wasn't mere inconvenience anymore, this was willful, malicious property destruction. She hadn't just removed the obstacle, she had destroyed it, believing she had the legal shield of her imaginary easement to protect her. I raced back, and what I found made my heart pound with a mix of white-hot rage and a chilling, predatory calm. The heavy steel gate was twisted on its hinges, the top bar bowed inward, and my industrial lock was lying in the dust, completely mangled. The tire tracks of her BMW were unmistakable, leading straight down my private, gravel road, and I knew, with absolute certainty, that the petty squabbles were over. I wasn't going to call the sheriff this time. No, this required a far more elegant, far more permanent solution, one that would not only prove a point but deliver a legal consequence she could never escape. I looked at the broken pieces of my defense, and a slow, wicked smile spread across my face. I would rebuild the gate, stronger, heavier, and far more imposing, but that was just the camouflage. The real trap would be invisible, undetectable, and perfectly legal, designed specifically for the aggressive. Entitled driver who didn't respect boundaries. I knew exactly what I needed to buy, who I needed to call, and exactly how to wait for my prey to stroll right back into my territory. The next 3 days were a blur of purposeful, highly focused activity, all under the cover of standard ranch maintenance. I told the few neighbors who passed by that the high winds had caused the damage, spinning a convincing tale about a freak microburst. I didn't want Patricia to catch wind of the repairs, or more accurately, the modifications I was making. My priority was not just to replace the damaged barrier, but to create an irresistible, enticing target that would draw her in again, only to deliver a consequence that would be both immediate and financially devastating. I ordered a replacement gate. This time it was a custom-made monster, nearly twice the thickness of the original, with internal steel rods and a hydraulic opener that could stop a tank. But the gate itself was merely the stage dressing for the main event. The real key to my plan lay in a relatively obscure, but critically important piece of agricultural infrastructure, the cattle guard. For those who don't know, a cattle guard is a recessed barrier, a series of metal rails placed over a ditch, designed to prevent livestock from crossing because they won't step on the unstable-looking rungs. It's a fundamental part of ranch life. However, I didn't install the standard off-the-shelf variety. I called a specialty contractor, a man named Ede, who had a reputation for building things that were utterly bomb-proof and perfectly engineered for revenge, even if he didn't call it that. We worked under the blistering sun, digging a trench directly in front of where the gate would be reinstalled, deep enough to make the structure truly effective. Ede and his crew laid down a custom-built, heavy-gauge steel cattle guard, designed for maximum deterrence. But here's the twist, we also laid a full, unmarked gravel path around the cattle guard, just wide enough for a sedan. From the outside, it looked like a standard ranch entrance, gate, fence line, and a slightly overgrown, but perfectly usable, dirt path around the main obstacle. It was an invitation, a clear choice. Wait patiently for the gate to open, or take the obvious shortcut. My internal thoughts were a whirlwind of anticipation and justification. She destroyed my property, she ignored my boundaries, she believes her time is more valuable than my rights. Fine, I will give her a consequence that speaks the only language she understands, cost and inconvenience. The new gate went up, secured with a brand new, even more robust combination lock. It looked exactly like the old one, only more formidable. But the true masterpiece was the cattle guard. I didn't want her to simply drive over it. I wanted her to deliberately choose the bypass, the unmaintained, unmarked, but seemingly open route right beside it. That shortcut you see was only mostly gravel. Underneath the carefully layered topsoil and loose aggregate, we had buried a 6-foot section of high-grade, road-rated tire spikes. They were installed perfectly flush with the ground, completely invisible, but designed to deploy instantly and silently when pressure was applied. They were only active on the shortcut path, while the main, legal path that bypassed the cattle guard and the gate was safe. A person simply waiting for the gate to open or using the access code would never be affected. This was not vandalism or reckless property defense. This was a highly specific, custom-engineered, and legally protected deterrent. The final element of the trap was the simplest, yet most crucial. I placed a new sign about 50 feet back from the gate, large and easy to read. It simply stated, automated tire inflation-deflation system in use. Access only via gated entrance. It was vague, it sounded technical, and crucially it provided just enough warning to satisfy the legal requirements for adequate notice. An honest person would stop. A person who believed the rules didn't apply to them would see the new gate, see the cattle guard, and then inevitably see that smooth, open, gravel path around it, and assume the sign was simply some kind of bizarre, empty threat. Patricia's impatience, her entitlement, and her absolute refusal to respect my property rights were now, quite literally, the keys to her own undoing. I had built the perfect mousetrap, and all that was left to do was wait for the HOA Karen to walk right in. I parked my pickup truck in a spot where I could monitor the entrance with a pair of high-powered binoculars, my heart rate steadily climbing with anticipation. The silence of the desert night had returned, but beneath it, I could feel the coiled tension of my perfect plan waiting to spring. I didn't have to wait long. It was almost 4:30 p.m. on the fourth day. The afternoon sun was beginning its slow, golden descent, casting long, dramatic shadows across the valley. I was pretending to tinker with a piece of heavy machinery near the barn, a good 70 yards from the gate, but my eyes were glued to the binoculars. And then I saw it, the familiar flash of an expensive, gleaming white BMW turning onto my private access road. My blood began to pump with a cold, electrifying rush. I could almost hear the triumphant monologue playing in Patricia's head. He thinks a bigger gate will stop me. He doesn't know who he's dealing with. I have places to be. She screeched to a halt right in front of the new, formidable steel gate. I could see her through the lenses, already agitated, her hand hovering over the horn. She didn't even notice the new ominous sign about the automated tire inflation-deflation system. Or perhaps she saw it and instantly dismissed it as a ridiculous, unsubstantiated claim from the uncultured rancher. Her eyes scanned the entrance, looking for the path of least resistance. She saw the new cattle guard, a definite obstacle. And then she saw the beautifully smooth, untarnished gravel path around it, the one I had meticulously groomed to look like the obvious legal bypass. Bingo. Her entitlement took over. She didn't hesitate. Without even pausing, she twisted the wheel, flooring the gas pedal, intending to take the shortcut at a speed that suggested she was fleeing a felony. In that single, drawn-out second, time seemed to stop. The BMW's tires hit the disguised section of the shortcut path. There was no dramatic explosion, no loud clank. Just a series of soft, swift, hissing sounds, 4 distinct, rapid punctures that ripped through her expensive, low-profile tires as the custom-engineered spikes deployed and instantly retracted, doing their devastating surgical work. The car immediately bucked, the sound of compressed air escaping sounding like a dying sigh, and the vehicle lurched violently before coming to a grinding, wheel-rim-mangling halt barely 10 feet past my gate. She hadn't even made it onto my actual ranch road. I dropped the binoculars and started walking toward the scene, slowly, deliberately, pulling out my phone to start recording the entire encounter. Patricia was already scrambling out of the car, her face a mask of shock, disbelief, and incandescent rage. She stared at the 4 rapidly flattening, smoking ruins of her tires, then looked back at the gate, then at the innocent-looking gravel. "What did you do?" she shrieked, her voice cracking with fury and disbelief. "You maniac, you've ruined my car." "I'm calling the police. You're going to jail for this, you hear me? Vandalism." I finally reached the front of her wrecked car, standing over the flattened tires like a judge passing sentence. My voice was calm, almost soothing, which only seemed to make her angrier. "Vandalism, Patricia, hardly," I said, pointing past her at the large, clear sign she had ignored. "The sign, ma'am, it clearly states the system is in use. You were given adequate warning. You were offered the secured, controlled access of the gate, which you previously destroyed. Instead, you chose to deliberately drive around a legally placed cattle guard on a clearly unmaintained area of my property. That shortcut is a maintenance road, and it's protected." I paused, letting my words sink in, then delivered the final, crushing blow. "I'm calling the sheriff, not to report me, but to report you for 2 things. Felony hit and run for the original gate destruction, which is now on record, and trespassing onto a private area of my property after being explicitly warned." Her face went from fiery red to a pasty, sickly white. The threat of legal action against me had been her shield. Now that shield was crumbling. A small crowd of my nearest neighbors, ranchers who had been quietly enjoying the show from their porches, had started to gather, drawn by the commotion and the sight of the mangled BMW. Their presence only served to heighten her panic. Patricia started frantically trying to call someone, presumably her husband or her high-priced lawyer, but her hands were shaking too badly to dial. "It's a trap. This is a malicious, illegal trap. You can't put spike strips on your road," she screamed, utterly losing her composure in front of the growing audience. "They're not spike strips, Patricia," I corrected her, my phone still recording her every move and utterance. "They are part of an automated tire inflation-deflation system, specifically designed to protect ranch equipment and deter vehicles from accessing unpaved, restricted maintenance areas. It is an industry standard on large, private properties. You ignored the warning, you ignored the gate, and you purposefully drove off the main path of travel. That, combined with the earlier destruction of my property, is a crime. Your car is now legally seized as evidence of trespass and property destruction." The sheriff arrived, looking even more tired than usual, but this time his demeanor was entirely different. He saw the state of the gate, the clear tire tracks, the custom-built cattle guard, the clear warning sign, and the 4 shredded tires on the expensive foreign car. He didn't even have to ask many questions. He took my statement, reviewed the photo evidence of the original gate damage, and looked at Patricia, who was now weeping hysterically, the picture of a woman whose carefully constructed reality had just imploded. "Ma'am," the sheriff said, his tone utterly devoid of sympathy, Mr. Davies has a clear warning sign posted. This is private property. You caused property damage before, and you chose to ignore the clear path of ingress this time. You are being cited for trespassing and felony property destruction, and your car is being towed off the maintenance road. As the tow truck operator winched the hopelessly crippled BMW onto the flatbed, the crowd of neighbors let out a few low, satisfied chuckles. Patricia, defeated and humiliated, was driven away in the back of a patrol car. The entire valley had witnessed the downfall of the HOA Karen. Justice, it turned out, was custom-built, perfectly legal, and delivered with the sharp, silent precision of 4 high-grade steel spikes.